Well, hey guys, we're back with episode 2 talking about, is Christianity the white man's religion? Is it a means of oppression? My name is Alex Suber. If you don't know me, I'm here with Pastor Cliff Blevins, one of our pastors here at Oasis, and he talked about this last Sunday at Oasis. Super easy topic to talk about, not controversial at all. And so if you haven't seen part 1, it'll be linked, and so make sure you go watch that, listen to the sermon, because we're not going to re-preach the sermon, but kind of get into some things that are a little bit deeper. And so we talked a little bit about the history and kind of going back to like first century Jesus, kind of coming through a couple hundred years. But I want to talk a little bit about, we hit on a little bit about Christianity within slavery and within, different things within America. And I mean, we could probably talk for 20 hours and not even scratch that. Exactly. But I want to kind of bring it up a little bit because I know there's people that are watching who are maybe it's not a personal experience for them, but they're wanting to understand more. They're wanting to, they're wanting to learn more so they can talk to other people. And so we mentioned that both of us come from kind of a Pentecostal tradition, and we can trace that back to a lot at the awakening and revival that happened in 1906, I think, at Azusa in LA. And of course, that was led mainly by an African American man who was not formally trained and educated, and the stories we have of he wasn't really that great of a speaker, wasn't like a celebrity preacher type of person, but just God moved, and such incredible things have come out of that. But even in some of our experience within modern church, because I think it's a little bit easier to kind of look back and we can kind of say, well, maybe it's this way, that way, but then we have people that are watching and they're like, well, I've experienced this myself. Exactly. This isn't a matter of history or a matter of hearsay. Right. And even some of the denominations that we've been a part of, just kind of give a little interlude, that started off as such great movements of unity, reached points where the splitting of the organization from one into two or more was a racial issue, where it was they didn't want to have the board of elders or bishops, for it to be people of different ethnic groups. Right. It's like, well, no, because again, going back to what we talked about in the first episode, then I have to admit that you're an equal, if we do that. And so we could get into those things, but I think even that, and maybe you just have, I'm just kind of, we didn't get this in the notes, but I think even that has kind of caused a little bit of this thinking within the church and even within America, because a lot of people have some kind of connection with Christianity that grew up in America, at least a little bit. Right, exactly. A grandma, an aunt, whatever, and because for the past, especially 50, 60 years, 100 years, there's been this divide. I think it was Dr. King that said, 10 a.m. is the most segregated hour of the year, or in the United States. Right. And so I think when things became segregated, it kind of, that's what people remember. They don't remember the 2,000 years ago Simon Cyrene helping Jesus carry the cross. Exactly. They remember, oh, well, when I was growing up, there was a white Baptist church and there was a black Baptist church. Exactly. There was a white Methodist church and a black Methodist church. And, so maybe let's just kind of springboard off of that. And I know you have some experiences as well. Yeah, sure. Of how do we, because those things are real. Right. Like, that's real. Nobody's, we're not trying to say that those things aren't real, that those things aren't reality. But how do we separate that from the kingdom, as you put it, the gospel, the true Christianity, versus just what people have kind of turned things into?
The biggest thing that I would look at, and I'll even go back to the white church, black church, or brown church, or whatever, how we want to call it. When I first came into church, it was an all black church. Kojic, and all black predominantly, and that probably was birthed out of necessity from civil rights, where interracial church was not kind of loud. It was frowned
Right,
upon.
right.
So that was probably out of necessity that you had to have a black church. But I come into a black church and I never thought anything about a racially diverse atmosphere because it was comfortable to me. And it wasn't until I began to, branch out into other churches, other denominations, and things like that, and then all of a sudden it became an issue. I'm like, and then when I think back, like, man, you were doing the same thing you're criticizing them for doing, being comfortable around somebody that looks like you, being comfortable around your style of worship and all those different things. And so now that's when it hit me. And I still had, problems with it. Like, man, why aren't any more black people here? Because they don't like the music. They don't, all those different things. But then I began to say, okay, God told me years ago that I was going to be a bridge.
Wow.
Right? And I would get to my pity parties and things like that. And God said, I told you were going to be a bridge.
Yeah.
Get used to being walked on.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, a bridge gets walked on.
A bridge gets walked on. So my perspective was never, hey, I need to quit this, leave this. It was always, how do I affect the change or impact change? And so within that, you have to grow thick skin. You have to realize the reason that they are like this or people are like this is because it personifies the need for a savior. When we say, okay, this is just, they're just bad people. No, it's like, hey, listen, they need.
It's like, that's kind of the point.
Exactly. I've got some messed up stuff about me too.
Right.
I've got prejudice and things like that. And so it made me just realize, hey, listen, if I'm going to raise my family, because once I held to Jesus, it was like the best thing that ever happened to me.
Wow.
And I didn't want to ever live like I lived before. And I realized that this is the way. And so I could not go back and just leave church, leave God, because I knew the ramifications of it was with my family. And that's when we talked about Psalms 78, when the psalmist said, hey, listen, you've got to teach your children and the next generation about these things, these wonderful works of God. Why? So that they can continue it on and they can experience the goodness of God. And I always wanted them to experience the goodness of God. And so we just, hey, we're going to stick it out.
Right.
And I've been to, I've been into, secular atmospheres where things did not turn out like I wanted to turn. Nightclubs, there are fights, there's, shootings and things like that. But guess what? The next week I was still back.
Yeah.
It didn't stop me.
Right.
And so you apply that same kind of vigor into your walk with God and say, hey, listen, people aren't perfect. They'll never be perfect. And I'm for sure not perfect. But I said, the greater cause is better than this immediate, interaction or emotion or hurt or, even victimization, right? There's some times where I felt like a victim, but I would not allow myself to stay into those situations. I mean, some of the craziest things I would hear, just talking to my pastor, I say, hey, man,
not me.
No. Previous before I met these, no, it's not. And we would have these conversations and, about issues of race and things like that. And he would say, we want more black people, we want more African Americans, because that was the kind of the kind of like the thing, right?
Right.
But then he would always come back, or they would come back, and this is not just him, there's other people would come back and just talk about, hey, the people here are scared it's going to be a bunch of interracial dating.
Yeah. Like I remember you telling me a story one time about one of the churches, and I think even you were, you're a minister at this point, licensed, and the pastor, as a white pastor, came to you, and I think there was a white girl and a young black guy that were dating, and he came to you and was like, can you talk to him and basically like, can you break them up, because we don't want that here, type of thing.
The exact term was, can you tell him to stick to his kind? That was exact term. It stung, but then it went back to, hey, listen, what's the greater good? I'm never going to tell anybody who to date based upon race.
I'd probably tell them, hey, you don't want to date her. If that's who you're married into, bro, let me help you out. Dodge a bullet.
The funny thing about it was that this guy was, he was a little bit different. I wouldn't even let him date my daughter. So the issue was not, his race. It was just like, hey, this guy's not. But when we filter things through race, it distorts so much. I even wrote down some notes that I didn't get to. When we filter it through, and I think through the political perspective, that we got the religious right and the liberal left, it causes us to filter everything from those perspectives, political perspective or social perspective, and never a biblical perspective. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And so that creates further discord, right? Because we've got these pseudo boundaries we've made, and we've got to heed to a political party or a social construct. And what ends up happening is God is nowhere in that.
Right. Yeah, right. God's not in a political party.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
so yeah, that reminds me of something that you said though, and I think this is, and I would love, because it's something that I see, but I'd kind of love to see if you see it, or if your perspective is interesting to me. And a lot of times when you talk about that liberal left, typically are pushing for more social issues and pushing for representation and diversity and inclusion training, and not just with ethnicity, but and pushing for resources to lower income families and areas and different things. But one thing that you said about where people are saying that Christianity is oppression is they kind of almost say it in a way as you're not smart enough to realize this on your own. Exactly. And so I'm trying to kind of tell you, and I've noticed that, but it's like, and I've seen even on, they do these campus interviews and different things where, like one time, and this is not about Christianity, but I think it relates, where they were doing interviews of, they went to a liberal arts college, mostly white students, and they're asking, should people have to have an ID for voting, which I know is a big topic issue, and every person that they asked that were young white people were like, of course, because most African Americans don't have a driver's license. They don't have access to this, and they don't have access to this. And then they went to, I forget what city, but they went to, predominantly African American neighborhood, and they were asking there, hey, do you think there should be voter ID laws? And every person was like, yeah, of course. And they were like, well, do you have a driver's license? And it'd be these grown people, like, yeah, of course, like, of course, like, what do you mean? But I just say that I feel like it's kind of that same thing where you have these people who are like, well, let me help you understand why this is, and so you kind of went off on that for a second, so I'll just let you kind of give your perspective.
One of the George Bush said this years ago. Whatever you think about him, he said one of the worst forms of bigotry is the soft bigotry called low expectations.
Man,
right? That's in a sense
low expectations.
Low expectations of me because of my race or ethnicity, and so I've always kind of thought about that. Like, man, why are you talking to me in this tone or whatever? Is it because you don't expect me to know something or things like that? And so when somebody says, you're following a white man's religion, you're being oppressed. It's probably one of the greatest form of racism to tell me I can't think for myself.
Wow.
And when you tell me because of my ethnicity or my race that I can't think for myself, that's more racist than anything else. And so that kind of makes me recoil. Like I say, I'm fairly intelligent. I can think for myself, and I don't like to be told how to think. And most people don't want to be told how to think, because if I can tell you how to think, I can control you. And that's being controlled. Oppression is being controlled in your mind. And so really, if you're telling me I can only think a certain way, or vote a different way because I'm a certain race, then that's a form of control. That's a form of oppression of my mind. Yeah,
like you said that with the whole voting, which the past couple elections have just been wild. But even that is like, well, how could you vote for them? XYZ, without taking into the consideration. You've done your own research, and maybe you came to a different conclusion, or maybe I came to a different conclusion, but just that knee-jerk reaction, because I know, there's a huge, I think it's Kanye said it, George Bush hates black people, he said that on that commercial, and Seth Meyers is like, but, the huge thing now is like, well, if you vote Republican, then you're a racist. Like, that's just blanket statement.
Exactly.
No other,
no consideration.
And whoever's saying that is like, it just real. I never really thought about it that way when you said that on Sunday, of like, they're assuming that you can't think for yourself.
Right.
They're assuming that you can't look up the facts, or you're not smart enough to quantify them. And I want to say, I'm just talking about anybody when someone says this to us, and so but that quote you said, that is the low expectations.
It's a form of soft bigotry.
That hit me so hard. And I think the kind of shifting here, I don't want to forget my ADHD, but I was thinking about something as we were talking about the black and white churches. And this is something that we talk about a lot, obviously, us and Dad and our other pastors and leaders and stuff. But that's something that I notice as well, is like when you have over the past couple of years especially, but really longer than that, you would have these conversations and things where people are like, well, we got to get more diversity, we got to get more. But typically, and I'm not on either side, I'm just kind of saying, is typically that was like, predominantly white churches. It's like, we got to get more diversity. But predominantly Asian churches, like here in Austin, we have a lot of Asian, where we have Korean churches, Chinese churches, Japanese churches, and no one's really going into those churches like, y'all need more diversity. Why is there exactly. not, or like me and Dad talked about, if you're in a community that's 98% one ethnic group, you can't really expect your church to be half, just because there's just not enough of those people. But I think because you had that push, and I remember a pastor that I looked up to, kind of some things came out about his life, but he was talking about that because there was a pastor of a very large church in Houston, of a historical African American church, maybe let's just say 90% African American kind of, and he was like, we need more diversity, and this pastor, who was a white pastor, he was kind of coming to him because it was a very diverse church and Latino, and because Houston is the most ethnically diverse city in America now. And this pastor was like, well, Bishop, like, maybe you're not called to that. Maybe you're not, like, yes, everyone should be welcome and accepted, but maybe those are the type of people that you speak to and that you minister to. And so what I thought about, though, when you were talking, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on this, is when everything was going on in Minneapolis, with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and all these past couple of years, these big incidents where people have been protesting all these things. We did here in Austin, we did a pray test,
right? Exactly.
Which I'm like, it's kind of a little cheesy of a name, but a bunch of different churches and groups came together and stuff, and so we were like, awesome, we'll go. And it was a big group, and we were across the street from the Black Lives Matter protest, which again was hilarious to me, because at our pray test, we had, there were African American pastors that were like praying and speaking and stuff, and then you had white people at the Black Lives Matter protest that were yelling at us to be quiet. Exactly. And I'm like, I don't think you're doing, but it was interesting, and I wanted to kind of get your perspective. You may not even remember this, but your daughter Ebony, one of your daughters, who's one of our worship leaders here at Oasis, we had asked her to, because we were doing all these little stops around downtown, and so we were going to do a stop, and different churches were taking turns, and we asked her to lead a song. Yeah. And to my knowledge, we didn't tell her. We were just like, hey, one of the songs, whatever you. And I think she sang "What a Beautiful Name" by Hillsong, and it was beautiful. She did, it was a cappella and all, which is nerve wracking. All that sort of thing. I want to find that
video again. That was great.
she did awesome, but I got a little annoyed because one of the other pastors at the next stop was very very vocal about saying, well, now we're going to sing black worship songs. And this was a young black woman, your daughter, who sang that song. Yeah. And he was like getting mad at her, and he's like, well, now we're going to sing some black worship. And then you had a whole group that was like, yeah, now. And I'm like, but she was the one leading the song.
And it was her heart.
And it was what she chose. Yeah. And so, I don't know. I just wanted to I don't know if you have a response to that, but it just kind of came to my mind when you were talking about the whole black church, white church, because it's like, what does that even really mean?
Right. And so what I think has happened is, and this is, again, my opinion, it's a podcast, I'm not in the platform, on the pulpit, but I think where we erred we've erred on the side of patronizing people, and that's kind of insulting. That again, a young black lady sung a song from her heart. Probably one of the most unifying songs that you what you need right there.
Yeah, people are weeping and
Exactly.
holding hands, praying together,
Yeah. And so what you need in that moment is unity. And so we're trying to break down these racial barriers, but then we put them back up, kind of unbeknownst to us. We're putting them back up, going back to black church, white church, brown church, and so it's almost like, okay, you're being patronizing. And so how I come down on those kind of issues is that I want people around me that I can have honest conversations with about these kind of issues, not just race or ethnicity or just any kind of issues. I like to know somebody's heart without them having to worry about it, whether I'm going to judge them or anything like that. And I think that's where we need to get to as a church, as a kingdom, as a country, is that we can have these open, honest conversations, and once we have them, we're not mad at each other. We're not we're not rolling our eyes, and we haven't put up a bigger barrier than we had before. Until we're able to do that, and I don't think when we say got the Black Lives Matter over here, Christians praying that I don't think it does us any good when we put up these barriers
right
all over again when we're supposed to be taking them down.
Right.
I think people, when they say these barriers, the only way we think we can take down these barriers is to destroy something or somebody. And that's not helpful to anybody.
Like we have to be against something.
We have to be against something instead of for something. And in the midst of us tearing down these barriers or these walls that have been built up for centuries and things like that, we can't just have them come down. We've got to tear them down in terms of there's got to be something or somebody destroyed. The cancel culture. There's something's got to be destroyed in order for this wall to kind of come down.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with that.
Man. Well, so much. I think we probably need to talk on this topic more. But these last few minutes, I wanted to just, and I know I'm sorry if I took up some of your time with. I know you had you have so much. Again, guys, go back and listen to the sermon as he walked through some of the history of the different councils and theologians and different things. But what I thought we could wrap up with is somebody that's listening. And maybe we could do both. Even if we run out of time, we can restart the camera. But somebody that's listening and who is not, feels awkward about this conversation, like you were just saying, where I want to have people around me that I can talk to and stuff. Even I've talked with other white people, like even the like, do I say black or do I say African American? Right. And like for me, that's kind of I kind of like get to know people because I have friends that some people use them interchangeably. Some people are like, no, I'm this or I'm this. Right. And you kind of have to get to know. But even just something so small as that, people are kind of like, I'm scared to offend. And they want to learn or they want to help tear down those walls. Right. So what would be your just encouragement or advice to somebody who's like, I want to help with this. I want to be better. I want to help the people around me be better, but I also don't want to get canceled for saying the wrong thing or upset my friend or something like that. Right.
One of the things that we have at our company, my wife and I, one of our values is solutions-based conflict. Right. We want conflict, but we want it to be solutions-based. Right. We can disagree, but let's disagree toward a solution. And so what I would say is that be around people that aren't like you. Not just to say, hey, I've got a white friend or anything like that. Right, yeah. But literally just because we value each other as image bearers. Right? We are made in the image of God. And so once we really begin to realize that we're all made in the image of God, not just this superficial cliche that, we're all God's children. Yeah. But once we really realize and tap into that, and I think that's something that maybe should be preached more, should be, what is the image of God? What is the image of Christ? And once we grasp hold of that concept, then the other stuff becomes easy because I realize that you're not just my brother, you're not just my pastor, you're an image bearer and I'm an image bearer. And all image bearers are equal at the foot of Jesus.
Wipe away everything else.
Exactly.
It comes down to that.
I was even told early on, I didn't have a church background or even like a model to how to treat your wife, and somebody said, "Would you say that to your sister in Christ?" Of course not. Well, why would you say it to your wife? Right. And so that was like a check in my spirit, right? All the biting kind of responses that we have toward each other. But if we actually put ourselves as image bearers of Christ, then do we really not like each other? We may disagree, but do we really not like each other? Do we really take these superficial sides on issues that, like I say, hills that aren't worth dying on? So.
I think that's great. And the second thing, and I know this was really your heart, and I know we got to talk a little bit. I think we definitely saw this on the Sunday when you spoke, but maybe just to the because and I say this because I know it's your heart is the specifically young, maybe millennial, Gen Z, young black man, young black woman that's listening to this, and they're wrestling with some of these things. Maybe they're believers, but they've been hurt, or they're being pulled by friends or pulled by people like, well, you can't believe that and be this. And maybe just let's close with you kind of speaking to that group.
Oh, definitely, because what I've seen is like even like young black or African American people that I speak with, some are actually ashamed to say it because of all this pressure.
Wow.
As if, like I say, this notion is new about oppression of a white man's religion. They're actually ashamed to even admit it or own Christ publicly because they don't have an answer. They don't have the history, and we could go. Like I say, it could be weeks upon weeks of historical kind of precedent that's set, but they don't have an answer. And so I would encourage them to begin to study, and just don't take the Instagram, social media, psychiatrist that has the most messed up life that we never see.
Yeah, you'd never want to be like them. So why do you take their advice?
Exactly. And so I would encourage them to study, seek out different forms of knowledge. Don't listen to this huge echo chamber. If everybody's saying the same thing, then I'm probably not going to listen. Especially, and so that's what I would say, because. Again, I wrote this note down. This is if I can say this.
Go ahead.
Right. The Bible doesn't begin with religious institutions, creeds, tracts, all those different things. And so what's happening is that African Americans are going toward, like I say, atheism, none, identifying as none, but then also going toward these nature kind of centered religions, and And so realizing that even most Gen Z, a lot are going toward those religions. The Bible begins immersed in nature, immersed in the garden with trees, where man had dominion over those things. Our salvation centered around nature. Jesus Christ was in the Garden of Gethsemane when he actually accepted his fate. Wow! Right, and he carried a tree trunk up a hill, to a mountain, and hung on a tree. So so those that are moving toward those alternative things that we think are new because they've just been repackaged, I would ask them to reconsider it, because the Bible is immersed in all those things that you're seeking. The Bible's already set precedent for that.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. And I know for those that are looking for resources, which you've got a book here, but I know both of us really enjoy Dr. Eric Mason. He wrote one, I think probably his most popular book, Urban Apologetics, but he's written several books and does a lot of speaking and things on this as well. I believe he pastors, is it Philadelphia? Philadelphia, yes. in the kind of in the inner city of Philadelphia. Yes. So there's great resources out there. And even if you're watching this and you're like, where do I start? What are some resources, some books, some podcasts? Leave a comment. We would love to respond to you guys. I think this will be something that we'll maybe dive into more, even, not even so much about the sermon anymore, but just so many different topics that we get into. So thank you, Pastor Cliff, for this. Thank you for taking on the weight. Like I said, it was not an easy topic, and I know, there's lots of disagreement and backlash and stuff, but I think, like you said, that mandate of being a bridge, and you just got to kind of accept it. I know people are going to get mad at me or whatever, but this is my mandate. This is my calling.